Good morning. I'm Dr. V. Rosser, the Director of Civic Engagement in the C. Raymond Marvin Center for Student Leadership at Bowling Green State University. Our campus community is gathering today to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King on the day designated in his name and honoring his legacy, a federal holiday designated as a day on, not a day off, a day committed to service and civic engagement. BGSU has a long history of honoring the work of Dr. King, and more formally began a long-term commitment to serve the community on this day 14 years ago, and I had the privilege of being part of the team that made that goal a reality. While the current COVID environment has set some limits on where and how we can serve today, we will have teams of students working on projects to impact the community at both on and off-campus locations. We want to thank the many community organizations who are working with us today, and those who are waiting to host BGSU volunteers when we can send teams further afield to safely work with their organizations. Today, we also inaugurate the BGSU Semester of Service Challenge, an annual call to invite members of the campus community to commit to serve between MLK Day in January and National Volunteer Week in April. It is now my great honor to introduce Dr. Rodney Rogers, President of Bowling Green State University.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosser, and I want to thank you and your team members and your colleagues, and also all of the work of the Dr. Ray Marvin Center for Civic Leadership and Engagement. And I also know we've got quite a few of our students and our faculty and friends and colleagues that are involved in this planning today and the work that will occur this afternoon. And I want to thank each of you for making this a day on. We greatly appreciate that. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So, you know, Dr. King was born on January 15th, 1929, so he would be 93 years old if he were alive today. But he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, which was 54 years ago, and Dr. King was only 39 at that point. So these are some facts, of course, that I hope each of us will never forget. But more importantly, what we know is Dr. King certainly was a tireless advocate and spokesperson for nonviolent activism and civil disobedience during the civil rights movement in the 60s here in the United States. He truly did live his life, and he gave his life to be an advocate for civil rights, to fight poverty, to push our country to achieve what we aspire for it to achieve. A place where all people are provided opportunities to live a life of meaning and happiness. But I hope we also don't forget the many other people and leaders that were a part of that movement. It is a part of our history. It's a part of who we are as a country. And those names, obviously, the Rosa Parks of the world, the Ralph Abernathy, Fred Shuttlesworth, and there's many, many more. And in fact, there's thousands and thousands and thousands more of people who joined together to push forward to evolve our democracy. And while progress has been made, and I hope we honor that progress and remember all of the work that was done to make that progress that we have made, we also know much work needs to be completed. And that is why it is important, certainly, to remember the leadership of those who came before us, but we must also keep our eye on the goal of this continuing work. And thus, I want to thank each of you that today are with us today to remember that work, yes, but also to do the important work to continue to lead. You have chosen this to be a day of service. focusing on helping others. And I also hope that in doing so, we become more aware of those around us and to honor the work that has been achieved. That is true, but that we also understand the work that remains to be done. It is also my honor now to introduce a special guest that is joining us live on Zoom, and that is Senator Sherrod Brown. Senator Brown is a native of Mansfield, Ohio, a graduate of Mansfield Senior High School, and we've got quite a few students right here at Bowling Green that are Mansfield graduates. He also attended and graduated from Yale University, has a couple of masters from the Ohio State University. And, at the time when he was elected to the Ohio House of Representatives, he was the youngest elected member of the House. And he served there in the State House from 74 to 82. He was elected Ohio Secretary of State in 82, was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 92 to represent Ohio's 13th district, served for many terms there until in 2006, he was elected as the senator from the state of Ohio to the U.S. Senate, and he currently serves as the senior senator from the state of Ohio. Senator Brown has a lot of different leadership roles. I note that he currently serves as chair of the Senate Banking Committee. But I also know that he has been a great advocate for higher education, organizing annual Ohio Education Summits, bringing together both public and private colleges and universities across the state together to talk about the future of higher ed and the role higher ed plays in the continued work of this country. He has been a tireless advocate and leader for many, many issues, but I so admire his work in the area, certainly of civil rights, but also workers' rights. And so it is my honor to welcome Senator Sherrod Brown to our kickoff session for our day of service here at Bowling Green State University. Senator Brown, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, President Rogers, and thank you for joining us on a snowy day in Northern Ohio. My wife and I live in Cleveland, and we all got hit hard today by that. So those of you that have come out in this snow, thank you. And those of you that are watching from home or office, thank you. And President Rogers, thanks. Thanks to Jaden Donald and all the students participating today. It's an honor to be here on one of the most important days for our country, the holiday honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. I appreciate the recounting of history that Dr. Rogers talked about. I appreciate that we know when and where Dr. King was killed. We don't spend enough effort talking about why and what he was doing in Memphis. He was there fighting for some of the most discriminated against, mistreated workers in the United States, African-American sanitation workers in a very racist, segregated city. 2 workers had died earlier. The city of Memphis, the mostly white city council and the segregated society of Memphis would not allow Black sanitation workers to have rest periods in their neighborhoods as they were picking up garbage. 2 workers, to get out of the rain, were sitting in the back of a garbage truck a couple of weeks before Dr. King arrived, and the garbage truck somehow malfunctioned, and these 2 sanitation workers were killed. That's why Dr. King went to Memphis initially, to organize those workers so they could get better wages and better benefits. So Dr. King understood, perhaps better than anybody in our country at that time, that civil rights and workers' rights were always interrelated, that he believed in the dignity of work. He understood better than anybody that human rights includes civil rights. It today includes gay rights. It includes worker rights, something never to forget. Let me start with a real quick story. I lead an annual tradition in the Senate where I gather senators of both parties, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, to read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. You know the story. In 1963, Dr. King sent the white quote unquote moderate ministers that were unwilling to roil the waters and to stand up for African Americans, stand up for civil rights. These ministers wrote a letter to Dr. King saying, slow down, don't move too fast. We support you, but not quite yet. Well, Dr. King wrote back a letter. He entirely rejected that premise. He wrote back in that letter, he said, human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It rolls in because we make it happen. And it's so often young people doing that work. John Lewis, whom I served in Congress with, went to Selma with, got to know very, very well. John Lewis was 23 when he spoke in the March on Washington. Dr. King perhaps seemed old to John Lewis, but he was only 34. The same is true today, and that's why I look forward to hearing Jaden's comments. Yours is the most civically engaged and active generation we've seen in a long time. And you have seen in this pandemic in so many ways has been the great revealer. It revealed wealth inequality. It revealed the importance, existential people like to use that word, of dealing with climate. And the pandemic revealed to all of America, those that wanted to know, many Americans already are very aware of that. The pandemic revealed the structural racism in our society, in housing and income and access to higher education, all of those things. And Dr. King talked about that. Many people on Dr. King Day like to sort of sugarcoat what he was up against and sugarcoat the opposition he had and sugarcoat much of white America's comments about Dr. King. But in fact, he understood structural racism. He talked about structural racism, and he knew he knew what we had to do. The right to vote, and essentially this was all with Dr. King beginning the right to vote. And so many people in this country, people of color, couldn't vote. The right to vote and to have every vote count is again under assault with the ferocity we've not seen since Dr. King was killed. We've not even seen since the March on Washington. We've not seen since John Lewis marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. We see the attacks here in Ohio. The far right wing is doing all they can to, it's like politicians. Some politicians think they should cherry pick who gets to vote rather than voters voting for whom they want. That's what these redistricting things are about. That's what President Trump is all about when he denies that he lost the election, when he said it was stolen. And nobody really thinks that except for him and his most rabid followers. Yet he continues to do that to continue to suppress the vote. We can't allow politicians and state legislatures to dismantle the democracy that Dr. King and so many others, as President Rogers mentioned, risk their lives to make real for everyone. We can't allow arcane, race-based, in many ways, Senate procedure that was used by segregationists to delay and block voting rights and civil rights for decades. So we don't give up on this. I know that a year into the Biden presidency, it can be easy to be discouraged. But again, go back to progress rolls in on the wheel, never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Because of the work and activists and scientists and healthcare workers and community organizers of ordinary Americans, people like Jaden, people like Dr. Ross, or people like Dr. Rogers, because Americans are standing up. Workers are demanding raises. They're getting them more than any time in recent history. Workers are finally getting, in many ways, in memory of Dr. King, are finally getting a little bit more power in the economy. I'll close with this. Before I turn to Mr. Donald, I want to make one announcement. Dr. Rogers mentioned Propel Ohio. We began this a half dozen or so years ago. Propel Ohio, essentially a student conference we sponsor, we help organize, but it's written and formed by the students who work on it. 2 years ago, Bowling Green hosted our annual Propel Student Leadership Conference. We have 400, 500, 600 students show up. The last 2 years, it's been done remote. This year, we're holding a virtual Propel conference on February 2nd on civic education. I urge civic engagement. I urge all of you to sign up. It's free to attend. Go to brown.senate.gov and register. I hope it can inform your life in a way that, and make connections and do all that you can do in a conference like this. And I'm sorry it's again remote. We had to make that decision that way. We expect next year the it'll be the 6th or 7th annual Propel Conference will be in person. So thank you. I'm honored to introduce the leader here at Bowling Green, Jaden Donald, coming from the city of Lima. Lima, I might let people know, and Jaden knows this, but others may not. Lima just elected a relatively young to me, not young necessarily to Jaden, a young Black woman as mayor of the city of Lima, a city that's no more than a third African American. And she is a trailblazer, and she is smart, and she is progressive, and she's going to lead that city forward. And I hope Jaden goes back to Lima after he graduates from BG and helps her lead. So I'll stop right there. Thanks for having me.
Speaking with me, Senator Brown. Good morning. My name is Jaden Donald, and I'm a second-year student at Bowling Green State University, and I wanted to start today with a quote. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the creative light of altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's persistent and most urgent question is, what are you doing for others? By Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. If you gain nothing else from these remarks, I hope that I can at least inspire you to think, what are you doing for others? Because if just a few people start thinking about others, well, then I know change is going to come. This month marks 159 years since President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, effectively freeing all enslaved people. It wasn't until 2 years later when the last slave would officially be free, but since then, many other vital issues regarding life and liberty were brought to the courts in hopes of making the lives of the individual better. 125 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued the separate but equal doctrine. Only 67 years ago did the U.S. Supreme Court rule that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. I don't bring these dates up to remind us of our troubled past, but to show us truly how far we've come. There is certainly more work that needs to be done, but as a community, we have been able to come together many times throughout our history, hand in hand, side by side, to bring about the change that we desire. It is when we think of others as a collective and work towards our united goal that we fulfill our true potential as people. So I ask you on this day of service, this day of giving back, this day of coming together hand in hand, and I ask, what are you doing for others? I'll leave with a quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jennifer McCary, the Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer at Bowling Green State University. Okay. Senator, it's nice to speak with you. Hopefully your morning is going well.
Going fine, thanks. Just digging out the snow a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and hopefully you'll allow me the time. But I just wanted to see, how have you seen the impact of your work as a senator impact the local communities in Ohio, but as well as the communities outside?
Well, I mean, my job is to advocate for Ohioans, and I do it all sort of through the prism of the dignity of work. And the term dignity of work, as I researched and thought about it, Dr. King would often talk about all work has dignity as long as people make an adequate wage. And I did some more research, and I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I found that a Catholic, a Pope 120 years ago used to talk about the dignity of work, that all work has dignity. So my job really is to advocate for workers. And that's, whether you punch a clock or swipe a badge, whether you work for tips, whether you work on a salary, whether you're caring for an older parent or you're raising children, whether, all of that to me signifies that all work has dignity. And unfortunately, our politics is too slanted towards the wealthiest people in this country. It has that bias, but if we focus our government and focus our government and our economy on the dignity of work, putting workers in the middle, we will have the kind of beloved nation that Congressman John Lewis talked about, that Dr. King talked about, because people will be treated in a way, regardless of race, people would be treated more fairly then. We're a long way from that. Dr. King was not necessarily a popular figure when he was alive, because he challenged structural racism, because he challenged the Vietnam War, because he challenged segregation and voting rights, and many stood against him, and he had the kind of courage to stand up. We need just a fraction of that courage to stand up right now against people that are trying to take away your right to vote. Even some states, just as students, you may want to know more about this. In some states, they are doing everything they can to make it hard for young people to vote. The far right, frankly, doesn't want young people to vote, because young people are less likely to support the far right. And that's what the fight in the Senate's about now. That's what the fight nationally in Columbus is about, where the state legislature is doing all kinds of things to make it harder for young people, to make it harder for people of color to vote.
So when we're referring to those young people, those people of color, and the people who are trying to get out there and make change in their community and become leaders in the future, what steps do you recommend to them to help them maybe spark a career such as yourself, or get out there and make an impact in their own way?
Thank you. Good question. I mean, I'll be quicker in this answer than the last one. First, the easy one is sign up for our Propel Ohio, because we're going to be talking about civic engagement. We'll have people there you can ask questions to, and I'm hopeful that it will set off some people in that path. And when we've done in the past, we've done Propel Ohio conferences, and again, where they're in person for a few years, and the last two have been remote. We do get feedback that people have kind of thought about a different sort of career, a career of community service. And but Dr. King said, no matter what your job, if you're helping others, whether it's a small business, whether you're working as a salaried employee in a large company, whether you're working in a local community organization or a theater or anything that you do, if you're working hard and serving others. The other thing I do, though, in terms of civic engagement, is I think, Jaden, just think about what bothers you the most about our country right now. What bothers you? Is it climate, that we're not, this often comes back to far right corporate moneyed opposition, sometimes racist opposition, but is it that we're not dealing with climate the way that we should? Because clearly Congress isn't, because of the power of the oil industry and the power of corporations and the far right politicians. Is it civil rights? Is it worker rights? Is it women's rights? That there is a whole movement to take away women's ability to make their own decisions on their own bodies? Is it that there are still lots of people in the far right that are trying to deny people the right to marry the person whom they love? All of those things are under fire by, we know what the former president, who still hasn't conceded the election, something never before seen in American history, or we know what people now in the legislature, in the governor's office, and across the country are trying to do. All of those rights that we thought were secure are never really secure, and you always need to be in the arena and make the fight.
So I wanted to ask, since we're on the conversation of young people, did you have any questions for me, Senator?
Well, yeah. Tell me sort of what got you to this. What made you? I mean, you came from Lima. Bowling Green's not too far away from Lima. I know it's really flat. You can almost see Bowling Green from Lima. But what got you to want to go there, and what got you to be so engaged in something like the MLK celebration? And to answer it this way, Jaden, answer in a way that might spark that same interest in others.
Definitely. Well, what got me coming to BGSU is honestly my favorite color is orange. No, but it was seriously, I had two fortunate business teachers. I was in a business program in high school. Two of my teachers, Miss Hood and Miss Donald, they really inspired me to pursue business. And in turn, they were both alumni from Bowling Green State University and encouraged me to check out the opportunities and the resources here at BGSU. And off my first visit at the business day, I fell in love. So that's what brought me to BGSU. But once I came to the Bowling Green community, I realized that I wanted to make an impact. Unfortunately, as a student of color, there's not as many students of color here at Bowling Green State University, and I wanted to be someone who could help improve the community, especially the community of color at Bowling Green State University, but also spark other young creative minds to want to show off what the Bowling Green community in general has to offer, but as well as what the Black community and communities of color here at Bowling Green have to offer. So that kind of goal inspired me to pursue different organizations that exemplify those ideals. In particular, I joined Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and became a member, and I'm so thankful for the connections I've made, the experiences, the leadership skills that I've learned by joining this fraternity and other organizations on campus. But what got me involved in the MLK Day service is, as some may know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I wanted to speak on behalf of the students because I wanted to encourage other students like myself to get out there, get involved, and make an impact in the community. And for students like me, I just come from humble beginnings from Lima, Ohio, not too far away from here. I'm just a student like any other. So I just wanted to show students that if someone like myself, someone from humble beginnings and someone who has worked tirelessly to improve on myself so that I could become a leader and improve on my community, and I wanted to show other students that any student from any walk of life can be a leader within their own community. And it starts by just asking yourself, how do you want to achieve that, and what goals do you have? So,
Thank you for that answer.
of course. One last question for you, Senator. If you were speaking to a student who wants to pursue a career like yourself, I know Propel Ohio is definitely a good start, but what would you encourage for a student who wants to get involved in their local community through politics?
Two things, I guess. Start with something like Propel Ohio. I'm not here to make money from Propel. I'm not here to advertise for it, but something like that. But think about what bothers you the most. As I said earlier, is it racism? Is it that this country is still because of powerful interest groups and one political party enthralled to those interest groups, we're not dealing with climate change? Is it the sort of so many men on the Supreme Court and in politics that are taking away women's right to choose? Is it any number of things? Think what bothers you the most, and then get involved in that issue with a local community group. And at the same time, think about a political candidate that might stand for the way you do on those issues, and volunteer your time. I worked in a number of political campaigns before I ran. In those days, it was for me, it was civil rights, and it was the Vietnam War. That's 2 generations ago, or generation and a half ago, whatever. But think about but you should, if you ever want to run for office, you should volunteer in campaigns with somebody you believe in. But pick them on part on what issues they fight for that you agree with them on.
Well, definitely, I appreciate the advice and the words of encouragement. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jennifer McCary, our Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer at Bowling Green State University.
Jaden, thank you so much. You continue to make us proud as you balance so much here as a student leader at Bowling Green State University. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. Each year here at BGSU, we celebrate the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not only through service, but the entire semester long through our Beyond the Dream programming. Indeed, across the nation, people celebrate and quote Dr. King, and they recognize him as this revolutionary freedom fighter. Dr. King is often remembered as someone who promoted peace, and people miss the point of his call to action. Many who quote him today are willing to use his words without reflecting on what it means for them personally. Dr. King once said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice." Often we seek peace and forget that justice is also the goal. And I think that that's what you heard President Rogers and Senator Brown reference in their remarks. Justice, much like inclusion, requires action on each of our parts. Words are often spoken, but are rarely ever enough because words can make us feel good or bad. Words can create the tension that voids peace, but it's our actions that can lead to change or destruction. Change would have meant we may be celebrating Dr. King's 93rd birthday, but instead destruction meant that his life was cut short at the young age of 39. His assassination, like many other leaders who were lost in the same way, is one of the greatest forms of injustice. Yet the reality is injustice is everywhere. In our own neighborhoods, on college and university campuses, in organizations and workplaces, and around the world. Even if we don't personally perpetrate violence or hate, when we are silent bystanders, we do contribute to the culture that allows violence, hate, and injustice to continue to thrive in our communities and our nation. As a campus striving to be a place where all belong, I hope that you each recognize that belonging is the result of our choices and actions. Serving our communities for the purpose of the greater good is what today is all about. But what about the other days? We cannot become so self-righteous that we forget to care for others, to serve others, to love others. We cannot become so siloed that we forget that communication is one of our most important tools. We must remember that communication is the action and process of exchanging ideas, thoughts, feelings. We have to actually care about the ideas, thoughts, and feelings of others as well. It's a goal of understanding one another. And when we better understand one another, our varying identities and perspectives and purposes, then we might be able to bridge the gaps that address the things that threaten to further divide us. Today is about service. Many of our other Beyond the Dream events were created to engage in dialogue, not only for the purpose of talking or listening, but with the goal of doing and shifting. We must become a more inclusive community with more cultural humility and greater respect for the dignity and worth of each person. We are a campus moving forward, and I want to thank everyone who helps us to create momentum that moves us in the right direction. I also wish to thank each of you who volunteered today and who will volunteer throughout the rest of this semester. Thank you so much to Senator Brown. Thank you to President Rogers. Thank you to Dr. V. Rosser and to everyone who has worked to pull us together today to do this event, to do this service, something so meaningful. I hope that everyone watching will register to participate in the Dr. Mark Lomax II concert and lecture taking place on Wednesday, January 19th in Kobacher Hall at 7 p.m. You can also stream that event by visiting our website. That is our annual MLK keynote speaker. And so that's another way to get engaged. Propel Ohio is another way to get engaged. There are so many ways to remain engaged, but we thank you for your commitment that starts today. And we hope that it will continue throughout the semester, throughout the year, and will continue throughout your lives. I thank you all so much, and I wish you good health and that you'll be well. Take care, everyone.